It's going to be interesting to see where the NAR falls after kind of the dust settles here. There's just a lot of changes still, I think, will be happening over the next few years. Now, that might take 6 months, it might take a year, it might take 5 years. A negative, disillusioned, frustrated crybaby about this thing, that will affect your business negatively.
They were offering 3% compensation to the buyer's agent. What does that do?
Yeah, just confusion.
Makes it completely more vague.
They said the exact same thing that you said. We're not going to remove the commission box because that makes it more vague. We want to provide clarity to the consumer. There's no way they're going to remember everything that you told them. We need to have a backup plan. Make your first priority to win the house for your clients. And I'm going to win through this change because I'm going to become more of a professional.
Now it's just a piece of paper that we're doing for formality.
Exactly. All right, guys, we decided it's time to, we've been kind of quiet on this NAR settlement thing because there's just a ton of information and it's changing all the time. And so we thought it'd be good to kind of revisit it as we're approaching about the 2-month mark from these changes being enacted. And I just wanted to go over briefly kind of where we are. And so the first thing is, August 17th is when these things are supposed to go into effect, right?
Yep.
The commission box is gone on participating MLSs. But that's one thing I want to talk about. There have been a couple of MLSs that go, yeah, we're just not going to do it.
Yeah.
We're not going to participate in the NAR. And what's interesting to me is like, I know our MLS here in Nashville decided, hey, you don't have to be a realtor to be a participant in the MLS, which that has been a requirement before, and they got rid of that requirement. And so we're starting to see a little bit of the dissipation of the National Association of Realtors, period, in terms of having control or sort of being the standard. You're starting to see that break up a little bit. And, so there's just a lot of changes going on that still, I think, will be happening over the next few years in terms of, what happens. And I was talking to another broker about this the other day, talking about the NAR. And one of the things that they provide to us here in Tennessee is they provide our contract forms. Well, if, we also have had and do have brokerages in other states, and those forms are not provided by the Association of Realtors. In a lot of cases, they're provided by the Real Estate Commission.
Yep.
And so it's going to be interesting to see where the NAR falls after kind of the dust settles here. And a lot of these changes are being enacted and forced on the NAR. But if you look at like the Northwest MLS, like Seattle and Portland, Oregon, they just said, hey, we're not going to participate and we're going to keep the commission box.
Yeah. You know what? The pipe dream, this is not the intention of any of this, but pipe dream for me would be that the move here becomes just a statewide MLS.
Yes. Oh man, that would be great.
We also own a brokerage. We have to participate in a number of MLSs in Tennessee if we want to cover the whole state.
Right.
That's annoying.
It's cumbersome.
And they do things a little differently. You don't have access to all the properties. So if we've got to go out to Knoxville, it's a different MLS. Mm-hmm. Memphis, different MLS. All these different things.
Right.
Statewide MLS makes a lot of sense. Put the forms out from the state-run commission.
Yes.
And, it kind of gets rid of a lot of the back and forth, I think. Because then you have, what if you operate in multiple areas of your state and you don't necessarily know exactly how they're planning to operate moving forward? Like, are they going to have this commission box? Are they not? Just, it's very difficult.
It is really difficult. And here's the other thing. The Northwest MLS, the Seattle, Portland, Washington, and Oregon, they said the exact same thing that you said, which was, we're not going to remove the commission box because that makes it more vague. We want to provide clarity to the consumer. The removal of the commission box creates confusion. And then now they were supplementing this with the seller concession box in a lot of MLSs. So it's like, okay, well, the seller's willing to give X amount of dollars, but it's like, well, what goes where?
Yeah.
And so we've created just a lot of confusion. It's just unnecessary.
I've sung this from the mountaintops since the changes were announced. This makes zero sense. The whole point of this was to make everything more above board so everybody had the same understanding of where the money was coming from and going to. And people had MLS access, not agent access, but MLS access to see they were offering 3% compensation to the buyer's agent. Everybody knew it. There was signed documentation of the people participating in the transaction. But even if you're not, you would see the 3% box.
Yeah.
Now you say, oh, we're not going to put that in there. We're going to make a seller's concession box. And maybe that money can go to the agent. Maybe it goes to closing costs. Maybe it goes to something else. What does that do?
Yeah, just confusion.
Makes it completely more vague.
Right. So it doesn't make sense at all. I would be surprised. There may be other MLSs that follow suit with the Northwest MLS, and I think maybe one of the California MLSs did the same thing, where they just go, you know what? Actually, this creates confusion. It's not good for our consumers, so we're going to go back to this. So we'll see what happens. But the other thing, so we had really two big changes. One of them is the removal of the commission box, right? The buyer agent compensation box. The second was that you had to have a buyer broker agreement in place. What Zillow has done is they've created a touring agreement that lasts for a week. So basically you tour houses with this particular agent for the week. And then if you want to proceed with a more formal agreement, you do it at that time. And apparently this Zillow touring agreement is completely compliant with the new laws. And so kind of what we said at the beginning of all of this is that there were going to be little workarounds or loopholes that people were going to find. And sure enough, we found that. So it's like even the buyer broker agreement, now it's lost a lot of its punch in terms of your relationship with your client. And so now people will be like, I'll sign a touring agreement, but I don't want to sign a.
Yeah, because the intention of the buyer broker agreement was to create a little bit longer lasting relationship, at least a couple months to give you some time with the buyer to continue to build rapport, find the right property, and move forward towards a contract. Now it's just a piece of paper that we're doing for formality.
Exactly. And so, look, obviously we don't agree with how this thing rolled out, but what I can tell you is you still need to get ready for it. And you still need to get ready because there's initially going to be this overreaction in the marketplace. There might be some media that comes back and says, hey, August 17th, now the sellers don't have to pay buyer's agents anymore. And they never did. We know that. But we saw all these sort of media pieces come out at the very beginning that were completely false and clickbait headlines, things like that. And we are likely to see those again as we lead up to this. So there's going to be an initial overreaction in the market where sellers are like, oh, great, I don't have to pay the buyer broker anymore. So we need to kind of get ready for that overreaction. But I think over time, things are going to settle and largely get back to some sort of normalcy where we're all operating within kind of the same rules. Now, that might take 6 months, it might take a year, it might take 5 years. But regardless, you need to get ready for the initial part of it. And then long term, what do you need to do with your business to frame things the right way so that your clients can understand them? So what do you need to do to get ready?
Wouldn't it have made a lot more sense just to institute some sort of document that spells out the total commission and then the breakdown of where that commission goes and then a signature box?
Yeah.
And that's it?
Yeah.
Rather than focus on websites and percentages on the websites and all.
I think I heard somewhere, and I don't want to give incorrect information, but even like the on this class action lawsuit, that the consumer, the people who were thrown into this class action that said, yeah, I was taken advantage of. Yeah, I was duped. I think they got like $150.
Of course. I mean, that's the way class actions work. Like you get your, AT&T, you get, for fiber and you get like $4.36 if you participate.
Yeah, these attorneys.
And attorneys get, a couple hundred M's.
What a joke. All right. So here's what you need to do to get ready. So the first, which again, this is one of these things that we harp on all the time, but please listen, start working into your sales process a buyer consultation and a seller consultation, because otherwise you're piecemealing information. It's like you're addressing things as they come up, which puts you on defense, and your clients don't have a full understanding of the picture of buying or selling a house. And so you've got to work in those consultations so that you can explain big picture, what's going to happen, how this works, and then we can talk about some of these changes and what might happen out there in the marketplace as they're shopping for houses and what we're going to do.
If you don't address it ahead of time and then the situation comes up, they're going to assume the worst.
Right.
They're going to assume that you withheld information to make it more advantageous for you. And that's not the position you want to be in. And, there's always things that could come up that you didn't cover. But the more you cover up front, I think the better position you're in. And we just did a mortgage episode. We talked about the consult on that. We've talked about seller and buyer consults. It's important all around. Anytime you're, entering into one of these more long-term contracts, as far as, it takes 30 days to close, got to cover all your bases.
Mm-hmm. No
they
question.
need to understand the process.
The second thing that you need to do while you're having this consultation for the buyer or the seller is you need to have this packaged up in like a little guide. If you are interested in joining Six Figure School, we provide you with that guide. All you have to do is sort of change out your
logos
and names and things like that. But we provide that for you. But basically, this guide, the reason we have that guide is so that it can be referenced. When you have a conversation with your clients, there's no way they're going to remember everything that you told them. And so when you have that guidebook, a buyer guidebook or a seller guidebook, that allows them to go back and remember points in the conversation, take notes, and also that becomes that quote unquote formality. It becomes more of a what's the word I'm looking for? It's more like the law. It's like, okay, this is just how this works. And so it's not up for debate anymore. It's more like, hey, this is just how it works. And so you're not playing defense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, honestly, it'll be much easier for you when you do hit a situation. You quickly explain on the phone and just say, hey, if you want more information, reference the guidebook I sent you. It's on page 8, whatever. And, then call me if you have any other questions. Yeah. And then they heard what you said and it got explained on the phone, and then they have a place they can go reference it, share it with the spouse, do whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And so, for the other thing is you want to have, as a part of this consultation, you want to have some talking points for the clients about this settlement, right? What this means. So what happens to sellers if they don't offer compensation? What happens to buyers if the sellers don't offer compensation? What happens with your buyer if compensation isn't offered? Like, what we need to have a plan ready so that we can have these talking points, because there's going to be, so for instance, a conversation that I would have with a seller, if they said, hey, I don't want to offer any buyer compensation, I would say that's completely fine, but be prepared for a buyer for a buyer's agent to bring an offer asking for their compensation. And that's going to be normal in the scenario. If you're not offering it, they're going to ask for it.
Yeah, they've already tested this in many markets, a number of markets in New York State, a number of markets in Florida. And what they're seeing is that the sale price is reduced roughly by the amount of the commission, which kind of offsets what would have happened anyway. Sure. And then people are going back to offering commission on the sale side. So it's... maybe that's not the long-term result, but that's the result we find ourselves in now because of the market that we're in now.
Yes.
Now, if the market really heats up, it becomes a big-time, seller's market, maybe that changes. Mm-hmm. But as of right now, I don't think a lot's going to change with this. And, and you just need to be prepared, like you said, to talk about it, about what happens if.
Yeah, you need to work through those scenarios and pre-discuss those scenarios with your client. Somebody asked the other day, hey, what happens? It was like Ricky Carruth, I believe. And one of the questions he asked on social media is like, okay, it's August 18th and your best friend wants to buy a house and the seller side isn't offering compensation. What do you do? And I love the way that he framed that question, because he goes, okay, it's your best friend.
Yeah, you're going to proceed.
So do you want to screw your best friend over? No, absolutely not. Or are you going to be as rigid with your quote unquote rule? And here's what I would say, just for all of you folks that are out there on your agreements, when you go out there, most of the time, the sellers are going to offer buyer side compensation, most of the time. If they don't, we need to have a backup plan. So if that's $2,500 for you to basically act on behalf of your buyer, to be a representative for your buyer, or $2,000 or whatever the case may be, but you need to have sort of, I think, a fallback number where it's like, hey, if they're not, I'm going to work to get compensation from the seller. If they don't offer me compensation, it's just a $2,500 flat fee.
Yeah.
That'll, basically work or that you'll pay to me.
The way I see this is that people will end up having packages, right? So a lot of people have packages on the sales side. So it's always been assumed that it's 6%, whatever. It hasn't been because people have always had packages. Like, you want 6% service, here's what you get. And we're listing at 6%. You want 5% service? You want 4% service? These are all the things we offer. It'll be the same thing on the buy side. Like, hey, I'll open some doors for you, but here's my, commission. And maybe it's flat fee, maybe it's percentage, maybe whatever, but people just end up having packages that they fall back to if commission isn't offered. That's my guess.
You think it's going to be packages?
I think that's the way it has to be, because if somebody expects 3% commission service, then, you need to be compensated for it. But if somebody just wants you to open a few doors and write a contract.
But do you think, though, that the sellers are largely going to offer buyers?
Totally.
Okay.
I'm just saying, these are fallbacks.
Okay, these are fallbacks.
This is like, hey, nobody offered compensation. We've got to fall back to something. And, what kind of service do you want? Yeah. Basically with this one.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's like, if they didn't offer it, then we can kind of go to that package deal.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So you just need to work through these scenarios and think through them and develop these talking points. And when you're having your consultations, well, let me go to this first. So when you're negotiating for your commission, the first thing is like, okay, in a normal scenario, you've got a house that's for sale. First of all, your first call should always be to the agent, right? So let's just say they've got, this seller concessions field and it's got an amount of money. The first call, I'm going to call the agent and be like, hey, I saw the seller concession field. What's kind of their thought process here? How much are they sort of planning for commission? How much are they planning for closing costs? So on and so forth. So I'm going to talk to the agent first, no matter what. And you should also do that just period. You should always first call, as soon as your client said, yeah, I want to put an offer on this, say, great, not a problem. I'm going to call the agent and kind of figure out what's going on.
Yep.
Don't just draw up an offer, because that agent will give you the information that you need to know so that you can write an educated offer, so that you can write an offer that potentially going to get accepted, so on and so forth.
There are a number of non-monetary based things you can put in an offer that might make it more attractive. Like maybe they have a specific closing date they're looking for, any number of things. Maybe they want to stay in the house for another 10 days after.
Yeah.
All those things you can work out that don't have to do with money, and you wouldn't know if you didn't call.
Right. The other thing is, if it's in a normal scenario and it's in the seller concession field, so it's kind of vague, write it into the offer, right? Put it in special stipulations. I'll bet the new forms that come out will probably have a place for you to ask for it. But basically just write the commission that you're asking for into the offer as a part of the offer. All of this should have been discussed with your buyer beforehand so that they have knowledge of it. And so you can spell that out there. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So...
Well, and maybe just because they put a seller concessions box in the MLS doesn't mean it's not negotiable.
Right.
I mean, let's say that they put a seller concessions box and it says $2,000 in it.
Yeah.
Write your offer and say you want 10.
Right. Okay. The second thing is if we get into multiple offer scenarios, and this is where it gets dicey. Again, you should have had a discussion with your clients about what happens in a multiple offer scenario. The thing that I'll say is, make your first priority to win the house for your clients. Here's why. Okay, first of all, you're going to instill goodwill, right? It's better to, rather than be greedy or to be stingy, to just do what you need to do to win the house for your clients in a multiple offer situation. That doesn't mean you have to be a pushover. It's a little bit of a tightrope. I understand that. But if you've talked to the agent, right, you've kind of got some idea, you can put in an offer that's going to be accepted. Now, here's why. If you are stingy and you don't get the house, the clients are not going to want to work with you again. Or there's potential for your clients not to want to work with you again. Because if they lost the house because of your commission,
then
they're going to potentially be upset.
That's why I don't like any of this because, and it's not greed. It's agents, good agents are out there working hard for their clients.
Right.
That, people see these big numbers at the end of the transaction, but sometimes you're working with that person for months or even years.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of work that goes into it. And the only one who's going to lose in this scenario is the agent that's been working hard because they're going to feel the need to cut their commission at the end to win the deal, as they should. And sometimes that's not fair.
It's not, and I don't like it any more than anybody else. But but if you lose that house,
you have to. I'm not saying you don't operate that way. I'm just saying it stinks because in some situations you've earned every penny. Now,
there's no question.
Now there's some layups too. But see, to me, it's easier to waive your commission in those scenarios where you met somebody on the street, you write an offer the next day, you're done. It's easier for me to waive half my commission in that scenario than it is for the months and months and months I put into work on this one, and we've wrote 8 offers, not won the house, and then we finally got one.
It's good to acknowledge that will be painful.
Yeah.
There's no question, right? If you get in there and you have to sacrifice your commission, but also, again, if you've put in the buyer agency agreement, hey, if they don't offer compensation, this is my sort of minimum.
You're covered.
Then you're covered, right? And when you kind of think about it that way, it's like, hey, that might be one you just got to take a hit on and you keep moving forward. And by the way, I would say that generally is a lot of times what happens just out there in the marketplace before this thing even happened.
Yep.
Right? Sometimes you got to take hits here and there to make a deal work.
Yeah, and we do it on the sales side too. Sometimes you have to list one at 4.5 or 4 or whatever.
Right. It's very true.
Yeah.
So, so you've kind of got to, in this deal, right, as we go into this, you're kind of going to have to be on a tightrope between keeping goodwill but not being a pushover, right? And so that's, keeping your clients happy but also not giving up all your commission. So there has to be, you're going to be walking that tightrope a lot, and you're going to kind of find your balance over time with that. And it'll become normal after some time.
If you do a really good job for your clients, assuming that they can afford it, they're going to be happy to pay. Yeah. I mean, we've had agents that have worked for us where the buyer has asked if they could pay the agent more money than they got from the commission from the seller.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So, I mean, if you do a good job, it should come back to you. Now, there's always going to be situations where the buyer can barely afford the house to begin with and is scraping money by just to get the closing costs and everything else paid for. And maybe those situations, they just physically can't pay you. But more often than not, people are going to want to offer you some sort of compensation just because you're doing a great job.
Yeah, there's no question. The other thing that I want to tell you, our last step would be just to go ahead and start working on this right now. Okay? Go ahead and start working this into your presentation now. Go ahead and start having these talking points now. By the way, your clients might, you may meet with your clients, they may not even buy anything until after August. So it's better to start talking with them about this now. But also, what's going to happen as you start to talk about it is you're going to find new questions. You're going to find new answers. Your brain is going to be able to work on this stuff. It's going to create new talking points. And you can evolve your presentation starting now versus waiting and then having, this huge hit, this huge, cut off, and then everything's different. If you start working on this now, then you're going to have everything you're going to have everything way more dialed in, and it'll be a smoother transition.
Yeah. It's so much easier to have more proactive conversations because if your buyer comes to you and says, hey, I heard on the news that I don't have to pay you anymore. Is that true? It becomes a very difficult conversation when somebody's approaching you with it rather than just being above board and sharing the information.
Yeah. And I've had run into those conversations before as well. And I've thought, man, I wish I had like a little pamphlet to be able to show them kind of how this works, because they develop their own philosophy around the rule. So anyway, the other thing, the final thing that I will say is to stay positive. If you're a negative, disillusioned, frustrated crybaby about this thing, that will affect your business negatively. If you go into this positively and think that this will separate the professionals from the non-professionals. I'm going to be a professional. I'm going to create great service or provide great service for my clients, and I'm going to win through this change because I'm going to become more of a professional. And so stay positive in the process. Okay. Any final words from you?
No, just I personally don't think a lot will come of this as far as
Agreed.
Yeah, at least in the next 2 years. There could be some additional disruption that happens. Maybe in the next episode we could talk about title, because I do think there's some disruption happening there too.
Yeah.
But I think for the next couple of years, I think people are going to feel their way through this. Maybe people test the waters on not offering as much compensation on the sell side, and then they realize, and they come back to the realization that they need to offer it. But, I think we largely end up in the same spot.
Yeah, I agree completely. All right, you guys, take some time, please like and subscribe to this episode. Thank you guys for sticking with us, and we will see you next week.